Hey there! In this video, we're going to explore skinning techniques, their nuances, and how to use them. Skinning is a broad topic that can't be fully covered in just one or two videos. Many skilled 3D artists tend to avoid it, but it's not as complex as it seems. Let's now demystify skinning together and explore how it works. So what is skinning? Skinning is a stage in 3D modeling that establishes a relationship between a skeletal asset and its geometry. In Unreal Engine terminology, it's essentially a process that distinguishes between skeletal and static meshes. We're going to explore its mechanics of this process in Blender. This is a simple Blender scene with two objects. We have an armature object representing a skeleton with a basic sequence of 4 bones. And the second object is a mesh, which is just a network of vertices. The skeleton is animated, and we're going to use skinning to bind this geometry to the skeleton. First of all, we need to bind the mesh to the skeleton. And this can be achieved with the help of a modifier. The modifier is called armature. We have to set an object, but at this point our mesh doesn't know how to deform so it could follow the skeleton's animation. And in order to address this, we need to assign certain attributes to its vertices. We're going to create a number of vertex groups to match the number of the bones that we have. In this case, the number is 4. Each group is named after a bone. Now we can specify to what extent each vertex should follow the movements of a particular bone. For instance, we can set a group of vertices to follow the animation of the bone 0.3 to 100%. Or 1.0. When I play the animation, these vertices will be moving with the bone. And we can repeat this step for other vertex groups. And I'll assign them to their respective bones. And now when I play the animation, again you'll see that the mesh moves along with the bones. If we don't want the bone base to be animated, we can simply highlight and remove specific vertices. If we bend it all the way down though, you'll notice that the outer edges look a little jagged. This is caused by the weight influences. And we can now smooth out the edges. For that, I'm going to select each segment. Then head over to weight paint mode. And here we can see how each bone influences different parts of our mesh. Now, under weights up top, I'll select smooth. And then I'm going to select deform pose bones and increase the number of iterations. I'm going to keep these vertices at the base unchanged. And now when I play the animation, the mesh is going to move more naturally. To examine the influence of each bone on the vertices, I'll switch to edit mode. I'll select this vertex, and in the end panel under vertex weights, we can see how much each bone influences any given vertex on the mesh. For instance, even the bone at the base has some degree of influence on this vertex at the top. And of course it has a greater degree of influence on a closer vertices. The sum of all these values should equal 1. And if I add another bone to the scene, I'll call it bone extra, it's also going to influence the vertices. Remember to give it the same name in the vertex groups. And when I assign the bone to this vertex, its influence is going to be proportional to the value set for this vertex in the vertex weights table. If I remove other influences from this table, the vertex will only respond to this specific bone. And that, in essence, is skinning. In real projects, bone hierarchies and skeletons can be much more complex. For example, a metahuman is made up of 347 bones, not including facial bones, which would add a couple hundred more. But the principle remains the same. The spatial behavior of a vertex is influenced by the vertex weights table. The table whose values can also be manually adjusted. Or even better, you can use the weight pane mode to add or remove any influence based on the selected bones. Now let's look at a more practical example. On the screen right now is a Blender project being prepared for Unreal Engine. This is a male character made up of separate meshes for the head, body, and hair. And there's also a skeletal asset called Root. The body looks a little unusual due to its bone orientation in Blender. This is a metahuman type skeleton. It is based on the mannequin bone hierarchy, but with additional bones on the fingers and toes for more detailed animations. Okay, we're going to apply our knowledge of skinning to a more complex task. We're going to attach this hat to the head. If I play an animation, the hat is just going to be floating in the air. It doesn't know how to behave. We're going to fix it. I'll stop the animation and select the hat. In the modifiers panel, we're going to add an armature modifier. We have to specify root as the object, which is the skeleton name for the metahuman or Unreal type skeleton. Next, we'll create a vertex group to manage the vertex positions. Even though the skeleton has 341 bones, we don't need to create vertex groups for all of them. The head's position is primarily influenced by the head bone. That's why we only need to create one vertex group. We're going to select the entire hat and click Assign. After setting this up, we can play the animation again, and the head will move with the character. I'm going to pick another animation, say fall. I'll play it, and you can see that the hat is on the head while the character is falling. This is a very simple example. Next, we're going to tackle a more complex scenario. We have a new project similar to the previous one, featuring the same male mesh with the hair, head, and body, along with a skeleton named Root. For convenience, some bones are hidden to avoid cluttering the viewport. These bones are present but are not visible at the moment. This time around, though, we have two more assets, trousers and a t-shirt, which we'll get to a bit later. Right now, we're going to focus on the trousers. Assigning individual vertex weights won't be very practical here, because leg animations involve multiple bones. And that's why skinning the trousers requires a more complex approach. But before diving into the technicalities of skinning this type of model, let's first examine the structure of skeletons. Okay, now we're back to the scene where we did retargeting in one of the previous videos. And here I want to demonstrate the significance of differences between skeletons. I'll navigate to the folder containing mannequins. They're available as templates. When you create a new project in Unreal Engine, you can select templates like third person, first person, and so on. There are 4 mannequin variants in total, 2 male and 2 female. They also fall into 2 skeleton categories, those without any suffixes and those designated as simple. And this applies to both genders as well. Despite having different skeletons, all of them share the same skeletal asset. However, the skeletal meshes do not utilize all the bones from this asset. And now let's take a closer look at the 2 skeletons. And we can see the simple mannequin is on the left and the regular one is on the right. While their hierarchies are similar, the simple skeleton has fewer bones highlighted in white. And this indicates that these bones are not used in skinning and are effectively absent. This means the geometry of the simple mannequin lacks information about these bones' locations. If you export the simple mannequin to other programs like Blender or Houdini and the rest, these gray bones won't even be listed, as they're only present here because these 2 share the skeletal asset. If I go to character, then bones, and activate all hierarchy for Mani Simple to compare the 2 mannequins, you'll see that Mani Simple obviously has fewer bones compared to the regular mannequin. What are the pros and cons of either composition? When should you use one or the other? You see, the thing is that the additional bones increase the computational load, as each bone represents a transformation matrix that must be recalculated for child bones and dependent vertices every frame. And if you're creating a game for mobile platforms or systems requiring high optimization using a more complex skeleton, a more complex skeleton might not be as optimal as going for many simple. And however, the complex skeleton offers some advantages too. For example, I'm going to raise many simple's arm. And I'm going to do the same for the other skeleton. And if I now zoom in on both of them, we'll see that the regular skeleton's shoulder contour looks more natural. In contrast, the simplified skeleton looks broken. Well, anatomically speaking, even this shoulder raise without clavicle movement is unrealistic. Let's put that aside for now. I want to show you something else that the simplified skeleton lacks, unlike the regular one. I'll select the hand bone. To get a better look, I'll hide all the bones except the selected one. Now, as I rotate the hand, you can see that the forearm is also rotating. If I make the same motion here, you're going to see a big difference in the way the arm deforms. So the choice between the two mannequins depends on your project's goals. If optimization is a priority, the simple mannequin is the better option, although it provides fewer visual features, and vice versa. But it's not the bone hierarchy that differentiates the skeletons, it's the special assets that control micro deformations. Let's get over to details and scroll down to post-process and in blueprints under skeletal mesh. If we clear it, you'll notice that the movements of the default skeleton are identical to those of the Mani Simple, despite the former having a greater number of bones. Let's bring it back now. At the bottom here, you can see a yellow bar with the button Disable, which also toggle the post-processing and in blueprints on and off. And this post-processing blueprint is quite complex, and we won't delve into its details in this video. I'll just give you a preview of its mechanics now. The blueprint primarily consists of the control rig that mathematically recalculates the positions of additional microbones in the skeleton. What it does is control rotations, making them smoother and more organic. And also it uses so-called RBF functions that prevent bones from unnatural stretching in various extreme poses. Apart from these skeletons, our project includes the metahuman skeleton, which is even more intricate compared to the previous two we just looked at. I'm going to load this skeleton's mesh. The preview mesh is not being properly displayed. You can see that there are even more bones. The overall skeleton structure resembles that of the mannequins, but there are additional bones that hands and toes and other body parts. The facial bones are not even included as they form a separate hierarchy of a very large number of bones. So, the post-processing blueprint controlling this skeleton is also more complex. Let me show it to you as well. You can see that it's made up of more functions, lending more complexity to it. Using mannequins of this level of complexity comes at a price, of course, but the visual results are pretty impressive. Okay, now we're going to return to our Blender scene. Now, having learned more about the Unreal Engine skeleton structures, we can now get down to skinning. At Nice Pictures, we design assets for metahumans and regular mannequin skeletons, as they are the most commonly used ones, with metahumans also being the most popular ones. However, there's a challenge there. Unreal Engine uses separate assets like post-processing blueprints to automatically recalculate the positions of additional microbones, such as those for biceps and triceps. Blender doesn't have the analogous microbones, which makes it difficult to emulate the same skeleton behavior using Blender's standard settings. It's not impossible, but it's time-consuming, and this may not be worth the effort. It's important to understand, though, that if we use only the basic skeleton for skinning, for instance, if for these pants we only assign the thigh and calf as influences, basically one bone per section, without including the microbones controlled by the post-processing blueprint, then as a result in the Unreal Engine, this mesh is going to be deforming unrealistically during animation playback. And this can lead to certain issues with the animation. In practice, we don't need to recreate an analogous system in Blender. Instead, we can transfer the skinning from a mesh that already has it. And while you can manually paint weights or assign them to each vertex, a more efficient approach is to use skinning transfer. And this approach involves using a mesh with existing skinning as a basis to transfer information from one mesh to another mesh. And here's how we can go about it. First of all, add an armature modifier to the clothing mesh so it could recognize that it should deform along with the skeleton. Go to Deform, Armature, and then Root. Next, to paint weights, you can either manually add them, which isn't very practical with the 341 bones in the metahuman skeleton, or you could let Blender handle it during the transfer. And here's how we can do it. Select the source mesh containing the skinning information. Then shift select the target mesh to which you want to transfer the skinning. Switch to weight paint mode and remove any masking to ensure weights are applied everywhere. In the Weights tab, choose Transfer Weights. Change the default settings to the nearest face interpolated and enable by name parameter. The other settings will leave unchanged. You'll notice a Create Data checkbox. This will add vertex weights to the table in the right-hand panel. I'll exit this mode, and now I'll check the transfer results by enabling an animation for this skeleton. But before that, I'm going to hide any obstructing bones. Okay, to enable animation, select the skeleton, and in the action editor, we'll pick, let's say, run. When you play the animation, you'll see that skinning is working and the trousers are moving along with the legs. There are clearly some distortions in some spots that we're going to address now. I'll bring out the side panel for convenience. Okay. Before getting into fixing these skinning issues, I have to first mention what causes them. So the transfer weights function bases its algorithm on the distance between the surfaces of the target and source objects, in this case the body and the pants. So if a vertex is closer to the right thigh, than the left one, the right thigh's information takes precedence, leading to these distortions. So during animation, this vertex is behaving as part of the right thigh. And nearby vertices as a group are behaving in the same way, causing these distortions. You can also manipulate the bone controlling the right thigh, which is a good way to manually test skinning in specific areas. In our experience, typical problem areas where this sort of distortions happen most often include some major joints, like for example the shoulders, then also elbows, wrists, hips, knees, and feet. Okay, let's now look at how we can fix these issues. There are actually many ways of fixing skinning distortions, but we'll start off with a more direct approach. I'll enable an animation to highlight problem areas, and then I'll switch to edit mode. I'll open the vertex weights table, which contains weight values for each vertex. These values dictate how much each bone influences a vertex. And this table also indicates which bone has the most influence on a given vertex. From the table, we see that this vertex has several weights associated with the right limb. To fix this, we can select the problematic vertices and then select a reference vertex. The one that's behaving correctly, and click on copy. And you can see that these vertices have the same values as the reference vertex. Any predefined weights on the selected vertices will be zeroed out. I can repeat this weight copying for other vertices as well. Here's the rub though. This approach is ideal for objects that need to share the same values, which makes it unsuitable for fabric simulations. If I copy one vertex's weights to a large group of vertices, they will form a single rigid block. This joint area here is a great place to demonstrate it. I'll select an area, copy one vertex's value, and the fabric will become blocky and it'll bend unnaturally, when fabric should deform more gradually. So this method provides a good starting point for approximate vertices orientation, but we're going to need to further smooth them out. Okay, and to do this, I'll enable face selection mode, and by pressing C, I'll activate circle select and select the most stretched faces. Okay, now in this selected area, there are too many bones that have an uneven influences on the surrounding vertices here. I need to redistribute the weights right now. I'll go to the weight pane mode and select smooth weights. The default active group should be switched to deform posed bones. One iteration's not enough. I usually set it to around 3 or 11, depending on the situation. And now the deformations look way smoother. You can also add more vertices to the selection and repeat this action for them as well. And for quicker access, you can add this function to your quick favorites. Alternatively, you can also use the combination Shift R to repeat the last action. Okay, now the vertices move a bit more realistically. But there's another issue. I'll select one vertex. The vertex weights table displays a large number of bones and values for this single vertex. While Blender handles this without issue, game engines like Unreal Engine have a limit on the number of bone influences per one vertex. In Unreal Engine 5, this limit is 8 currently. That's why the number of bone influences must be reduced to no more than 8 per vertex. And we could do it manually by deleting the smallest value bones and then press normalize. But there's of course a more efficient way to do it. I'll select the entire geometry, switch to weight pane mode, and in the weights menu, I'll choose limit total. Instead of all groups, I'll select deform pose bones, and I'll bring the limits up to 8 instead of 4. This is not the complete solution though. If I select a vertex and normalize it, changes still are happening. This indicates that limit total algorithm only discarded the lowest weight values, but did normalize the remaining weights. That's why we need to normalize them as well. Again, select everything again, switch to weight pane mode, and press normalize all without lock active. Now we've ensured a skinning setup that should work well in Unreal Engine. This process needs to be repeated for the areas with where there's a lot of creasing. I'll change the animation. Let's look at how automatic skinning handled this area. Then I'll select this bit of the geometry and switch to weight paint. Then smooth again. I'll reduce iterations. We can use Shift R to repeat the last operation, then apply limit total followed by normalize all. The deformation should now be less aggressive. Some tweaks might still be necessary. This is an iterative process, although it can be automated to some extent. Again, limit total and then normalize all. And now the deformation of this area looks more realistic and the fabric moves naturally. Here I should add that there are areas that should be more rigid during animations. This brings us to the earlier method of assigning weight values to specific vertices. Let's take this button for example. You can see that during the animation it deforms quite unrealistically. We need to select all the button's vertices and assign one vertex's value to them. I'll go for this vertex located behind the button and press copy. And the button's no longer deforming, but is acting as a single vertex. There's another problem though. If I select the animation fall, for example, you'll notice that this button is now sinking into the pan's geometry, and that's where you'll need to make a choice. If there's ample time, you can tweak each vertex manually, but if you're pressed for time, you'll need to choose whether to allow the button to deform slightly, conforming to the overall clothing deformation, or to add additional bones or rework the skinning setup. The best approach will depend on your desired outcomes. If you're familiar with skinning techniques in Blender or other programs, our method might come across as a little unusual, as we don't often rely on manual weight paint, where you switch to the paint mode and meticulously adjust weights for each bone. We rarely need to resort to such detailed work. Generally, it's sufficient to transfer weights from an already skinned skeletal mesh and then smooth out any minor issues in problem areas. And this is often more than enough. For areas requiring more precise deformation control, such as buttons that need to maintain their rigidity, we use direct skinning techniques. Let's pick another button, select all vertices, and then a reference vertex, and copy. And now they will behave as if they have one deformation for the entire mesh. A few words here about Unreal Engine. The version 5.5 comes with the built-in Mesh Editing Tools plugin, which allows editing skeletal meshes. Even though it was available in other versions too, it wasn't enabled by default. Here's this plugin. It's a good plugin, though we hardly ever use it in our workflow. Our custom solutions do the trick for us. It's worth noting that there are various ways to influence skinning. You can go to the Edit tab and by selecting specific bones, make necessary adjustments, which might be more than enough to address immediate problems. But of course, the information covered in this video is just an introduction and doesn't even scratch the surface of skinning and weight painting. It's huge field, a specialized field, and it's impossible to cover everything in a short video. However, our goal was to provide you with a basic understanding of the process and to showcase the practical tools we personally use, which should be sufficient for fixing common problem areas in your projects. And that's a wrap.